his connection to other major serial killer stories.
Like other cases.
It's going to make you question everything that you thought you knew.
Search goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
The murder of 6-year-old John Benet Ramsey captivated the nation.
I did enough time. I learned my lesson. I ain't doing nothing wrong.
What's it like at 1:31? On a good day tomorrow.
There's been a murder committed there, and I'm responsible for it.
Hey guys!
Welcome back to our channel. So today we're going to be doing another true crime video. We've been so excited for the second one. We're so happy that you guys seem to like the... What did we do?
Richard
How did I
Ramirez.
forget that already? Your comments were so nice. Like, I
Yes.
love the comments that were like, it feels like I'm just hanging out with my friends talking about serial killers.
Now we have a blanket. So
Yeah,
like,
get cozy, you
besties.
guys.
Yes.
Oh, we also have a lot of snacks.
Oh,
We have candy, first of all. Cookie dough bites,
we got the
best.
same candy because
We
we're
did.
the same person, but we
Same
also don't want to
person.
share.
Thank you guys for liking that last video on Richard Ramirez. We're glad you like it. And if you want to see more of these true crime videos, let us know, because this is probably like our most exciting thing to film.
I have so many like true crime stories that I could talk about.
Yes.
This one, we've actually mentioned it before in another video. And we promised you guys we would talk about it later, so here we are. It's one of my favorite, probably top 5 stories just because of the... Well, you'll find out.
So this is a story of Ed Edwards. You've probably never heard of him unless you're like a super true crime junkie like we are. I had never heard of him until like a couple years ago. I was listening to a podcast, and when I heard the story, I was like, holy shit, this is the craziest serial killer story I think I've ever heard. Like one of like top 5.
Yeah, it's insane. What makes it so interesting is that he's like a serial killer on his own, but his connection to other major serial killer stories, insane.
Like other
Insane.
cases.
It's going to make you question everything that you thought you knew.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Let's tell this story. So, Ed Edwards was born, actually that was not his real name. He chose Ed Edwards for some reason. He was born Charles Murray in Akron, Ohio, and he was born in 1933. So he had a really troubled childhood. He was born to a single mom. He didn't know his dad. And when he was super young, like a toddler, he saw his mom commit suicide in front of him. And then after that, he had nowhere to go, so he was sent to an orphanage for, I think he was there for 8 years. He ends up writing a book, like an autobiography, and in the book he stated that while he was at the orphanage, he was mentally and physically abused by the nuns that were there running it. And he says that he blames his life of crime on them and what they did to him, which that kind of goes back to our argument in our last Richard Ramirez video about like nature versus nurture.
Were serial killers born or were they made?
Exactly.
Would Tom Riddle not have been Voldemort if he was treated right as a child? We'll never know.
I think it's a dick move for him to just blame it on that, but we'll get... Anyways.
I feel like a lot of people blame the way they are on their trauma.
On other people, yeah.
There's no excuse to be a bad person. Maybe don't murder people.
Yeah.
Maybe see a therapist instead. See how that works.
Yeah. And he said that at one point, one of the nuns asked him, like, what are you going to do with your life? And he said, and I quote, "Sister, I'm going to be a crook and I'm going to be a good one." He was probably like 13 when he said that.
He could have been a good cop or investigator.
Yeah, why a
with
crook?
that attitude?
A little bit later, like after he was done with the orphanage, for some reason, he got sent to a reform school in Pennsylvania. I think he was around 15 at this time. He stayed there for 2 years, and then he moved back to Akron, and that's when he started committing like small crimes, which he eventually got arrested for. And he was sent to juvenile detention, which he stayed for a little bit, but then he was able to get out of it because he wanted to join the U.S. Marines. So they're like, okay, you can get out of juvie if you sign up for the Marines. So he does that, and he soon goes AWOL. He just does not show up.
Did you know I didn't know that was an acronym? AWOL?
Isn't it away without leave? Mm-hmm. Really?
I didn't know. I was like, oh, AWOL. It's like, oh, you disappeared. I thought it was just a word.
So he went AWOL, and then he ended up being arrested for some kind of unspecified crime. I'm not sure what. And this was in Jacksonville, Florida. And
It's always Florida.
It's always Florida.
What's
Florida
wrong
man.
with you, Florida?
Who is Florida man?
It's the Gators.
It is the meth gators. So anyways, after he was arrested, he had a dishonorable discharge from the Marines. I just choked on a gummy worm. I can't wait to play this back and see the fear in my eyes.
All right, so after being discharged from the Marines, he committed a string of crimes, mainly forging checks. And then in April 1952, he was caught trying to impersonate a Marine because, like, he missed his old life.
You had your chance.
Don't go AWOL, okay? But he got caught and sentenced to a federal reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio. And then not long after being released from there, he was arrested again on burglary charges. So he was doing a lot of petty crimes. While he was being held on the burglary charges, he escaped from jail by pushing past a guard and then escaped.
That's what he said in his book, but like how do you just push past a guard?
I don't know. I don't think he pushed past a guard. I think he bribed a guard.
I think so too. Like that's the only thing that makes sense.
It has to be dirty from the inside out. We've seen Orange is the New Black. Okay,
Yeah.
we know how they work in there.
It's fucking funny.
So he went to Oregon robbing gas stations when he needed money, and he stated that he never disguised his identity because he wanted to be famous. Which is funny because how many of you knew his name before today?
Right? I want to be famous. Do you remember that
What
line?
is that from?
I want to be famous.
You did the voice so good. When he reached Portland, Oregon, he committed some more armed robberies and was caught and sentenced to 3 years in prison plus 5 years probation.
This was in Montana. This is going to come back later. Just you wait.
He escaped again in prison.
How did he do it a second time?
In 1960, he escaped prison again. How?
These guards. How is he bribing them? He didn't even seem that charming.
No, he just looked like a boy in this picture.
Yeah.
At the time that he escaped, he was being questioned for the murders of couple Larry Payton and Beverly Allen, but was never charged for those murders.
Let me tell you about Larry and Beverly. Once again, he was never convicted or charged for these murders, but they're very similar to what we're going to tell you about later. So on the evening of November 26th in 1960, Larry Payton and his girlfriend Beverly Allen, they were super young. They were like 19, 20. They disappeared after having made plans to go shopping together. The day after they disappear, Larry's car was found with his body in it. He had been mutilated. And Beverly wasn't in the car, but her purse and her coat were still in the car. So they were searching for her for a long time. Her body wasn't found until 2 months later by like a construction crew, I think it was, or like a highway crew. She was partially nude and she was in a ravine, and she had been raped and strangled to death. Once again, he was not charged for these. A few other men were, and then they were later released, but just saying, remember that story. So in 1960, in November, Ed Edwards got what he wanted when it came to fame. He was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, which is crazy. And it's crazy that like a lot of people still haven't heard of him after he was like a huge criminal, like put on that list.
Did you guys ever used to watch Unsolved Murders on Lifetime? Mysteries.
Mysteries,
Unsolved
yeah.
Mysteries.
Oh, I love
and
that
then
show.
at the end they would put like
The photos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think of. And I'm like, did I ever see him? I used to watch that show all the time. And I don't ever remember. I mean, I also wasn't born, so there's that.
So after he was put on that list, he was caught shortly after that, and he was sent to Leavenworth, which I think was in Kansas. It's like a federal penitentiary. And this is where he said in his book that he met a prison guard who turned his life around and helped him like become this new man who like didn't commit crimes anymore. So after being paroled in 1967, he ends up releasing his book a few years later. He becomes an inspirational speaker. He tours with his book.
Can you imagine the amount of people that didn't know?
That's the thing. Like, these people didn't know that he was a murderer. They just thought he had committed these little crimes and turned his life around. Isn't that insane?
I'm sorry. If you commit a little crime, I'm never talking to you again.
Right.
I don't want any part of you because I know you're going to murder me one day. Do you ever think maybe how many people you went to high school with have murdered somebody and gotten away with it?
Now I do. He was paroled in 1967, so he did not serve his full 16 years. Also, he was white, so...
The guards were probably like, oh, you're white? Okay, come on.
So he ends up being an inspirational speaker, gets remarried. Him and his wife join like the foster care system, so they end up fostering some kids. He was married once before when he was in Portland, but apparently that didn't work out.
Edwards appeared on 2 television shows called What's My Line and To Tell the Truth.
Yeah, To Tell the Truth. That one is...
We'll link it below.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. We'll link it
It's
so you can see
literally
it.
a game show about guessing who Ed Edwards is, right?
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, it's like each episode is, there's 3 contestants or like people playing, and one of them is the person that they're all saying they are. So basically, there's 3 Ed Edwards, and they all come up.
Number 1, what is your name, please?
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number 2.
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number 3.
My name is Ed Edwards.
I want to be famous.
And they all have to convince like this group of people that they're the real Ed Edwards.
He also wrote his autobiography in 1972 as well. So he was doing very well. He was being a secret murderer, not getting caught, writing books, being on TV shows, being on the most wanted list, and nobody cared. Yeah. Nobody cared that he was an actual criminal.
I mean, people actually started like celebrating him as a family man now because they were like, oh, he's so reformed. He's such a good guy. So he had a pretty decent reputation.
He bought a house in Doylestown for his wife and 5 kids. And he begins hanging out with the police and snitching for them.
He would basically like try to coerce people into telling him about the crimes that they had done. And then he'd go tell the police about those crimes.
Yes.
Go snitch.
Exactly. Snitches get stitches. He would come home after, like, he would snitch on all these criminals, whatever. And then, mysteriously, in all the towns that he would move to, his house would be burning down. He would be coming home, and his house is burning down.
This happened like 3 times. His house just happened to be burned down. And he convinced his family, like, oh, it's because I snitched on this criminal. He found out that it was me, so he came and burned our house down. We gotta go. We gotta move states. Like, move states. Like, literally state to state to state.
In the middle of the night. He would wake up his kids and, like, okay, we gotta go. Come on. Why is it not being questioned that maybe somebody in the family is the one doing it?
The second time it happens? Come on.
Okay, so that's a bit of his background, but now we're going to get into the murders that he was actually convicted for. The first murders that Edwards were convicted of was with Billy Lavico and Judy Straub. Billy was 21, Judy was 18, and they disappeared and were later found dead, shot in the neck at point blank range. So
with a freaking shotgun.
Can you imagine? Like, aren't those holes big?
They like scatter out, so it's like multiple holes. This is where it gets so crazy. 3 years later in Wisconsin in 1980, Timothy Hack and his girlfriend Kelly Drew, they're both 19, super young, they went missing. The place that they were both last seen was where Ed Edwards was working. So he was working at this reception hall called Concord Hall, I believe, or Concord House. So he was working at this reception house as like a handyman, I think. Timothy and Kelly had gone to, I think it was like a wedding party. So they were celebrating there, and then that night they go missing. The next day, his car is still found in the parking lot, but they're not in there. So everyone that was at the wedding is questioned, including everybody that was working there, all the guests on either side. Edwards was questioned, but we'll get more into that. And they didn't really get any leads. So 2 months later, Kelly was found strangled to death, again, just like the previous. The one that he didn't get charged with. Timothy had been stabbed to death, so it was very similar to that first case that he didn't get convicted of. Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew, their deaths, these were known as the Sweetheart Murders.
So, as we mentioned earlier, Ed and his wife would foster kids a lot. Well, he had this one that everybody called, his name is Danny, but everybody called him Danny Boy. He was easily manipulated by Ed. There's a podcast called The Clearing with April, Ed Edwards' son. We'll get into her later. And
her daughter, not son.
Ed's daughter, April, has a podcast called The Clearing where she, like, the whole podcast is talking about him. And he used to record tapes. Nobody knows why he used to record all these tapes. There were boxes and boxes of them. And they were going through them, and he had audio recordings of his conversations with Danny Boy. But he was a soldier in the U.S. Army, and Edwards convinced him to go AWOL, which is on recording. They rehearsed phone calls ahead of time. So it would be recorded, and Ed would take it to the police and be like, see? But he had Danny say, I'm going to leave, I left. And then he would say things like, oh, so you're leaving the army? Like, persuading him to answer yes or no questions to incriminate him, basically. So after he went AWOL, he took Danny Boy to the back of the house in the woods and shot him in the back of the head. Buried him in a shallow grave. And then a year later, Danny Boy's body was found by a hunter. And from there, the case goes cold because police can't find any leads. Now,
you'd think at that point...
Let's, like, backtrack a little bit. His foster father is a criminal on FBI's 10 most wanted list. You're just gonna, oh, you don't have any leads. Like, if this was nowadays, Law and Order would not be having this.
So this is where it gets to the point where the police are starting to find out who is doing all these murders. So in 2009, which is I think almost 29 years later, after all of these people were murdered, Wisconsin gets a cold case, what's it called? Cold case grant, where they're able to reopen 5 cold cases and study them to try to find out who did it. One of these cases was the Sweetheart murders, Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew, the ones at the reception hall that we were talking about earlier. And thanks to DNA testing, they were able to, I think, grab some semen off of Kelly's dress or coat or something. They were able to go in to get some DNA testing done, and they linked it to Ed.
Boys are so sloppy with their semen.
So Ed Edwards was arrested on July 30th. They finally got him. But this is where it gets so crazy. So Kaycie mentioned his daughter, April Bellaccio, I think is how you say her last name. They had put out a newspaper article about him, or like not Ed Edwards, but they put out a newspaper article trying to get any information from anyone in the town about the Sweetheart murders, like who could have done it, whatever. April saw that newspaper clipping and it triggered these memories in her mind, and she became suspicious that her dad, Edward, was involved. So she called her local police station, the authorities.
That takes a lot of balls.
Right? Your own dad?
To be like, wait a minute. My dad. I just try and picture, like, my dad coming out and saying, by the way, I've murdered a bunch of people. And it's, like, devastating to even think that my father could do something like that.
Like, as she's thinking about this, she's, like, remembering all these different things that happened when she was a child.
Are you ever just doing something and then all of a sudden a smell reminds you of kindergarten?
Right.
Like, you black out memories more often than you think you do. When I first heard about this, because I read about, in People magazine, there was an article that she did an interview with talking about it. And I was like, how do you not remember something like that?
Until you're older.
And then hearing her explain it in the podcast, I was just kind of like, oh, because I've done that before, where I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot that happened.
The podcast is amazing. If you guys haven't listened to it yet,
again, it's called The Clearing. It's so good.
It's really in-depth about everything. When April's reading this newspaper, she recalls that 2 nights after the Sweetheart murders at the Concord House, the reception hall, her dad woke his entire family up in the middle of the night and convinced them that they had to, like, flee. They had to move to a different state. No explanation, really. I think he was always kind of saying, like, the criminals are after us for snitching. So he kind of just had that excuse, but he made them get up in the middle of the night and move. So he moved them all the way to Pennsylvania. And then she also remembers that when he came home that night, he had a black eye and a cut, I think, on his nose. And he had told his wife, her mom, that he had gotten a fight, and that's how he got those injuries. And then when he was questioned by the police, like I mentioned earlier, he told them that it was from a hunting accident. They believed it. They bought it. Like, how do you get a black eye from a hunting? Like,
what animal punched you in the face?
Punch you in the face?
Did you run into a tree? I mean, that's realistic for someone like me.
And then all these memories are flooding back into her head. She also remembered that a couple years later, after those murders, this is so crazy. We already talked about his house burning down 3 times, but he took his kids camping, not the wife. She was in the hospital. And when they returned to their house, it had been burned down again. Edwards kept insisting, like I said, that the criminals were doing it and following them around. But her brothers told her that they had actually gone to the police and admitted that they were the ones that burnt the house down because their dad made them do it. That sounds good. Okay, Dad.
How do people listen to him so easily? Like, if you were to be like, Kaycie, can you burn my apartment down for me, like, at 7 o'clock tonight? I would be like, no. Like,
I want to know how old his sons were when they were convinced to do that. Because he was super manipulative. But also, how old were they? They didn't know what was going on.
True, but you have to be old enough to know how to start a major fire and not make it look suspicious because nobody questioned it.
Right. So anyways, Ed is arrested for arson for that in 1982 and he's let go in 87. So he only had like 5 years to spend.
For good behavior.
Right. Good behavior, but every time we let him out, he just goes and like burns his house down again. She also said that Edwards lived in at least a dozen different states while he wasn't incarcerated from the years like 1974 to 2009, and he used a bunch of false names.
Listen to her podcast. I think she addresses that too. It's, again, really great podcast. I think they have like, 9 or 10 episodes?
Yeah, it's so good.
Really good.
So anyways, after she remembers all these instances and all these crazy things that happened during the time of that Sweetheart murders thing, she calls Detective Chad Garcia, and she tells him, my dad, I think he was responsible for the Sweetheart murders.
Guys, listen. I have a hard time getting through this next sentence without laughing. And it's not because I think it's funny. It's just funny. The children of Ed Edwards, like years after the fact, were, and I think this was when they went camping because she was in the hospital. April's sister just randomly tells her, "Do you remember Mom was in the hospital because Dad stabbed her over an empty bag of chips?"
It wasn't even empty, it was half empty.
If you open any bag of chips, it's half empty. She probably didn't even eat them. He stabbed her over it. But then April has no memory of this at all. She doesn't remember any of it. So when I mean, he is two Eds, so I'm not wrong. When he was 77, he was extradited to Wisconsin for the double murder, the Sweetheart murders, and he really wanted the death penalty, but Wisconsin wouldn't give it to him. So he called Ohio and was like, "Hey, I killed Danny Boy, as well as those two, the Billy Lavico and Judy Stroud, that were shot with a shotgun at point blank range. He admitted to those murders as well. So he really wanted the death penalty, and I think Ohio gave it to him. Because they were like, cool, thanks. After he was convicted of the 5 murders, he was granted the death penalty. That was scheduled for August 31st, 2011. That is my mother's birthday.
Oh, that's
and
creepy.
My sister's birthday. However, this makes me so mad.
It's so frustrating.
His death penalty was in August. He died in April from, what was it? Leukemia.
Diabetes.
Heart ailments.
He was just really unhealthy.
He was really unhealthy, and he walked around with like a
oxygen
tank. He was really, but you know what? He didn't deserve to live a full life like that.
This was only a month after he had been sentenced too. Like, he didn't get to suffer enough for what he did. So those were the 5 murders that he was actually convicted of and charged with. But there's a lot of speculation that he was involved in several other murders. Detective Chad Garcia, the guy that April called to tell him that her dad was the killer, he's confident that there were at least 5 to 7 other murders that he was responsible for. And now here's where it gets real crazy. Remember we said this in the beginning, that he's tied to like some of the craziest murder mystery crime,
when I first heard this story, I was like,
he has been pointed to being the Zodiac killer.
That's right. You better know who that is. If you don't, watch the movie. Jake Gyllenhaal was amazing. Honestly, just to sum it up, he left like, what are they called? Cryptograms of messages that needed to be decoded that would let the police know what he was going to be doing next or who he was, and giving them instructions like, put this in the front page of the paper, or I'm going to kill tomorrow.
He played a lot of games with the police.
It's still unsolved.
It's
never been solved. They have not caught anybody. And in fact, I think they posted one of the cryptograms in a newspaper, and a couple that the wife and the husband do crosswords all the time, they solved it. The police couldn't solve it. They solved it. But anyways.
Before I get like super into this, I just have to let you guys know I'm super skeptical. You're not as skeptical.
Every time she was like, but how do they know that? But how do they know that?
There was a guy named John Cameron. He was a former police detective, and he wrote a book about like all of these supposed connections that Ed Edwards has with these famous cases.
Edwards.
Yeah.
And he mentioned all of these
crazy connections that he thinks that he has with it. I don't believe a lot of them. But anyways, the Zodiac is crazy to think about because...
Do you believe this one?
I think there's a lot of weird coincidences. I don't know if I believe it. Do you?
Yes!
You think it's truly him?
Absolutely! Okay, first of all, there was a 13-letter cryptogram that they couldn't solve for the longest time.
And it said, by the way, my name is, and then it was these like 13 letters.
Okay? Spell this with me. Ready? E-D-W-A-R-D. E-D-W-A-R-D-S. That is 13 letters. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah,
okay?
That is crazy.
Here's another shocker. You tell them this one.
So there was a survivor of the Zodiac attack, and she came forward and said that at some point when she was being attacked, the Zodiac told her that he had spent time at Deer Lodge prison in Montana. Remember we mentioned that Ed Edwards was in Montana at Deer Lodge? So that's where he was, Deer Lodge prison from 1956 to 1959. So they have that in common. Okay?
So one of the Zodiac's messages mentions, quote, all that I have killed will become my slaves. In Edward's autobiography, he mentions the Deer Lodge prison, and he's describing an inmate from that prison, and also that he believed that anyone he killed would be his slave in the next life.
That's a really weird coincidence right there.
That's because it's not a coincidence.
So also in that cryptoid message, in the cryptogram, there were 18 symbols left over that had not been decoded. And later, they were decoded in 2010, and it read, I'm Edward E. Vexed IQ. Hath you greater than I. Vexed IQ, hath you greater than I don't understand what that means.
I don't know if that means either. That sounds like he was trying to be too cool or something.
I can see how, like, people would make that connection, and it does kind of make sense because it seems like goals. It seemed like the Zodiac Killer really wanted to be famous too, just like Ed.
He
like they had
loved
this
the
obsession with
attention.
that. Yeah.
Are you guys ready for this next one? I don't think you're ready for this. As much as your mind is blown about what is already happening with this case, we're going to throw a wrench in that and give you a total 180. 2 words. Teresa Halbach.
Making a murderer?
Right. Making a murder. Wow, why are we talking about making a murder?
I don't know, Kaycie, tell me.
Let me tell you. Because Ed Edwards was in Wisconsin an hour away the night Teresa Halbach was killed. And it gets better. Why don't you tell him?
There is this documentary footage. The lawyer in Making a Murderer, somebody's interviewing him. And in the background...
Guess who's standing there? In the courtroom.
It's this old gentleman that looks exactly like Ed Edwards.
Is Ed Edwards... Stop being a skeptic! Ed Edwards killed Teresa Halbach, set up the Averys, and then watched it all go down. It's almost like he really wanted to be caught, and he was just like, you guys are stupid. I'm literally right here.
So like Kaycie said, Ed was reportedly an hour away from Stephen Avery's house when this went down, and it was also on Halloween night, October 31st, that Teresa went missing and was murdered. And Ed had, like, I guess an affinity to murdering people on Halloween. He was connected with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Let us know what you guys think. Did he do it? Do you think he did it? Research some more. There's so many more facts. We could probably do a whole episode just on his connection to those cases.
Yeah.
Now, John Cameron mentioned some other cases that he thinks that he was linked to, but we're
both on the same page.
We don't think he was. So
no.
The first one, the Black Dahlia.
He was 13 at the time.
He was 13. There's no
Just because he was
way.
in Northern California at the time, they're like, oh, I guess he did this to the lady. He was only 13.
That doesn't make any sense.
No.
And then the other one was Lacey Peterson. Do you guys remember that case? Scott Peterson killed her. Everybody knows that. She doesn't remember the case. Roast her in the comments. And then the last but not least, that I definitely don't think he had anything to do with.
JonBenet Ramsey. It was her brother, okay? I'm just going to say it now.
You think it was her brother?
I think it was her brother, and the parents covered it up because they didn't want him to get in trouble.
Yeah, that makes the most sense to me, too.
We could do a video on that, too. If there's anything that we mentioned that you guys want to see a video on, or if you have your own suggestions...
Ooh, we could do a video just on theories about JonBenet.
We could.
Because there are a lot of theories. Let us know what you guys think, and maybe we'll explore them.
Okay, one more that is I don't think he's connected to that we forgot to mention is the West Memphis 3.
Oh my god.
Okay, apparently there's a photo floating around that looks... Or like, no, it's actually documentary footage, I think. And he looks like he's in the background of a funeral of one of the victims. I seriously feel like any older white guy could look like him.
Yeah, he does look like a grandpa.
He does.
Like an overweight grandpa.
So we don't really believe those 3.
Yeah, no. I definitely think he had something to do with Teresa's murder. Fact. 100%. True story.
No.
And I definitely 100%, my whole heart believe that the Kennedys killed Marilyn Monroe and he was the Zodiac Killer.
We agree on that one.
See, I've got her on it. I'm just going to convince everybody else. And there's a podcast on that too.
Yeah.
Called The Killing of Marilyn Monroe. That's an insane podcast also. I love doing these kinds of videos. I could talk about them all night. I just wish I had all the knowledge in my head. We take notes and we read off them because out of respect for the story and the people in it, we don't want to get anything wrong.
But anyways, you guys, that was Ed Edwards. Hopefully you found this as crazy as we did and we do. Like, it is such an entertaining, terrible, horrific story.
All right, guys. Thanks for sitting, chatting with us. Let us know what you think. Is he the Zodiac Killer? Is he the murderer of Teresa Halbach? Did the Kennedys kill Marilyn Monroe? All the answers point to yes.
We'll have everything linked down below too. If there's like videos for you to watch, any references so you guys can read up and get some more info if you're interested.
But like, subscribe, comment, share the video, most importantly, let other people see it, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye. This is where it gets so crazy.
Why does this always happen when we film?
My neighbor is so loud, and every time we film, especially about scary stuff, he like... It sounds like it's my door almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He can probably hear us talking about murders, and it's like,
one day
my name is crazy.
We're gonna have a video floating around 3 minutes straight of us getting scared in our own videos.
So this couple, Timothy and Kelly, went to, I think it was like, are you okay? Was it a hair?
I dropped a piece of chocolate and I picked it up and I put it in my mouth, but there was Frank hair on it.
Ew!
Thanks, DNA testing. 23.
Just a sec. Nice talking with you.
April's sister just randomly tells her, oh yeah.
Oh yeah. There was a survivor of the Zodiac.
I'm gonna give it. I'm a survivor. Keep on surviving.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh my god. We hang out too much.